Hey, this is Matthew with Sword Slinger Custom Holsters, doing another radio-related video. I've done several radio-related videos in the past several months, and they have a few of them have blown up in popularity on my channel. And my channel is mainly centered around my leather work, but I have done some videos on radios and things of that nature. And I wanted to put together a presentation on just some things that I've learned dealing with local emergency communications using FRS and GMRS radios, and mainly GMRS is what I'm going to focus on. But we're going to talk about FRS as well and their applications in an emergency situation, kind of like a hurricane or where power's down for a long period of time, cell service is down for a long period of time, and kind of what you need to do certain things. I mean, if you want to talk a mile out, 5 miles out, or farther, what do you need to do that within these two services? And I'm no expert in this, but I have learned a lot during this process, and it is a process. And I want to share that so I can share with mainly people that I meet, that I want to just share kind of what I know and what may be able to help them locally. And I'll share it out there on YouTube for anybody else to watch and listen to. But it's mainly for people that I meet that I want to share this with, and that way they can get up to speed on just what little I know in this radio journey. And first off, let's start out with why emergency communication? What's the big deal? And this is kind of self-explanatory, but the main thing is just staying connected with friends and family during, service outages like cell service outages when it's needed. Natural disasters like hurricanes, it's useful for that to communicate with friends and family, as well as communicate with other people with radios to see what stores have supplies. Like in Louisiana, it's not uncommon for people looking for generators and chainsaws and things of that nature, or gasoline from at gas stations. What gas stations have gasoline and fuel? Things of that nature. That is not uncommon down here. And it's also a lot of fun too. So it is what you would consider a hobby. The first one I want to talk about is FRS radios, which are your most basic. You can find them about anywhere at Walmart, or you can get them online on Amazon. They're very affordable. You can get a set of two between $20 and $50 for your basic radios. Yes, you can go and buy more expensive ones than that, but honestly, if you go and buy a $200 two-pack of FRS radios, they're really not any better than a $20 set. They may have some different features, but as for range and power, is absolutely the same. And the range you're going to get is about a half a mile to 1 mile, depending on the terrain. Now, they are line of sight videos, so you could, technically, if you had one person on one mountaintop and one on the other, you could talk farther than that. It really just depends on the terrain. A lot of these radios you're going to see like 40-mile range, and that is very exaggerated. It really just depends on the situation, and those are very exaggerated situations. You do not need a license to function these. If you live in a neighborhood and you have houses within line of sight in your neighborhood, everyone in the neighborhood could probably have one of these and communicate with one another. Or if you're out in the country on a farm and you have different houses on the property that are nearby, you could communicate that way as well. This is perfect application for that. But keep in mind, a half a mile to 1 mile at best. That is what these are made for. And the FRS service, the family radio service, has 22 channels. All 22 channels are shared with the GMRS radio service, which we'll talk about in a minute. The maximum power on an FRS radio, no matter what kind, whether it be this fancy one here, it looks like a base station, or a handheld made by Midland, or one made by Baofeng, they are all 2 watts, no more. Sometimes there are less ones that have less, like half a watt, but they're no more than 2 watts. And all the FRS radios come with antennas that are non-removable. You cannot take them and put a better antenna on them. You only have what it comes with, and that's it. And that's a big deal, because you may be able to You can't add another antenna to make a better antenna. You just have to work with what you have, and they're very limited. A half a mile to 1 mile. Then you get into the GMRS radio service, the General Mobile Radio Service. And honestly, when it comes to handhelds, the prices are about the same for a basic model. Now they get much more expensive, but you get a lot more with the GMRS. You can get a very inexpensive GMRS radio that has a wattage of 5 watts output for around $20 for two. In fact, this set right here you can get for like around $20 for two radios. That's a 5-watt radio. These are super simple. They don't have any screens on them, and I'm talking about this one right here, and we'll talk about it later on in the video. No screens, just knobs, very simple to give and hand out to people, and they're very inexpensive. Your handheld range is going to be 1 to 6 miles, handheld to handheld, sometimes farther, sometimes not. It all depends on the terrain. My wife and I have talked around 6 to 7 miles on this set here, radio to radio, and it all depends on the terrain. And that is very decent for a handheld. You're going to get different variables whether you're in town or wherever, but it is possible to talk that far on these radios, and terrain is a big deal. If you're out in the desert where there's no obstructions, you're going to be able to talk a whole lot farther than somebody that is in the mountains. So that is just some things you're going to have to figure out with your terrain. And like I said, the prices vary from $20 to all the way up to $150 or more for a handheld. There is a license required, though, for GMRS if you want to stay legal. The license is $35. It's through the FCC, and it covers the entire family. If you buy one, your children, your mom and dad, everybody in your family is covered for 10 years. It's kind of like a fishing license if you want to stay legal. No testing required. You just pay and you go. And it has 22 channels that these radios operate on, which can communicate with the FRS radio. So if you have an FRS radio or somebody in the community that has an FRS radio and you have a GMRS, you can talk to them. You will have more power than they do, but you can still talk to them. Now, if they're farther out, you may be able to talk to them, but they may not be able to talk to you. So it just depends on the situation, but they cross over the frequencies. Only the channels between 15 and 22 can be used at full GMRS power, which is up to 50 watts on like mobile stations, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But most handhelds are around 5 watts. There are some that are like 8 and 10, but most are around 5 watts. But you can only operate GMRS at the full power on between 15 and 22 in those channel ranges. Now, GMRS radios have removable antennas in order to upgrade to much better antennas. This is a big deal because you can upgrade to aftermarket antennas that greatly increase your range of a handheld versus the little antenna that comes with the radio. So if you're going to get one of these, you definitely need to upgrade your antenna to something more substantial, which we'll talk about here in a minute. One antenna that I use is the Nagoya NA-711G. I use this using a Baofeng GM15 Pro. And I personally have spoken with my wife using this exact setup. Basically a $25 radio and a $20 antenna, so a $45 setup around 6 to 7 miles with our terrain in South Louisiana. Handheld to handheld, two of the same radios using the same antennas. Now this does not mean that it will work in your situation, but it is possible. In fact, depending on your situation, it could be worse or it could be even better. But I think that is pretty good considering the money you pay for the handheld and the antenna and what you're able to do. Now, I will say it just depends on the terrain. In the spot that we did this, if I went like just a little bit up the road from where I was at, I couldn't talk to her, but I kind of found a sweet spot where I could talk to her that was a little bit higher elevation, and I was. And I have no doubt that I'd be able to talk to her even farther depending on the terrain and the elevation. Okay, GMRS mobile radios. Now this is very important. You can set up a GMRS mobile radio in your vehicle with more power than the 5-watt handheld, and it adds much better range. You can put an antenna on top of your car, mag mount antenna, or you can mount one to your truck or whatever it may be, and that increases your range tremendously over the 5-watt handheld. Now a mobile radio is going to range in power and price. So you can usually get into one for around $100, $110, and they'll go all the way up to $350, $400. The most powerful one being a 50-watt radio, and the weakest one being around 15 watts. I think is the weakest one that I've seen in the mobile range. And I personally use a 20 watt as a base station and then a 25 watt in my vehicle. And the 20 watt works really well. It is actually this one right here, the Radioddity DB20G. Very good radio. I'd highly recommend it. It works very well. I have the Radioddity DB25G in my vehicle. It's a good radio. I actually like the 20 better. For some reason, I feel like it works better, but both are good radios. Now, if you don't have the money to do a mobile radio in your vehicle, you do have the option of using your handheld and getting an adapter and putting a mag mount on top of your vehicle until you get a mobile, and basically increasing the range of your 5-watt handheld using a mag mount antenna, which has increased range because it's a better antenna. So that's something you can do pretty affordably. The mag mount antennas are not very much, usually around $20 or $30. You can get the little adapter for probably around $8 to $10, and then you can get, if you have your radio already, you can basically set it up for mobile. Now, the biggest bonus with all this is you can set up a base station at your home and then set that up to where you can talk to anyone out there with a handheld or another base station in your community. So for example, you can take a Radioddity DB20G like you see here on the screen, and you can take a antenna like a Comet CA-712EFC or a J-pole style antenna, and put that on a pole, on an antenna mast on your home, and hook it in with your mobile unit and have yourself a base station, and using a power supply, and that will increase it to many miles. Right now my current setup using a 20 watt radio and a Comet 712 EFC, I can talk radio to radio in around 7 to 8 miles just using the 20 watt. Now if I upgraded the 20 watt to a 50 watt, that's going to increase tremendously. Now you can also go with a J-pole, which you can get online or you can build yourself. You can buy them online at different companies for around $38, $40. The Comet, which I would highly recommend, it's one of the best GMRS antennas out there. They're around $140, but they're well worth the money, every penny. You can also use GMRS directional Yagi antennas. They're called Yagi antennas. They're directional antenna that focuses your signal to a specific direction. Now these can be pretty inexpensive, and you can do a lot with them. You can get them on Amazon. The cheapest one there at the bottom of the screen there is around $38. I personally have that one, and I've hit a repeater 40 miles away using a 20 watt radio. So you don't have an omnidirectional antenna where it's in a circle around you, but you could point your antenna towards a repeater you're wanting to hit, and you can use something like that to go even farther. And they range from $38 to $150 depending on what type you get, and there are better ones and worse ones to get. That $38 one I mentioned is probably one of the least best ones out there on the market to use. It's not a very good one, but it works for what it is. Like I said before, I personally have a Radioddity DB20G and a Comet CA-712 EFC antenna. And I can talk around 8+ miles on simplex. That means radio to radio, and I can hit a repeater well off 40 miles away consistently. Sometimes there are days that I've hit repeaters much farther away that I normally can't hit consistently. And the main purpose of that is has to do with just how the weather is and things of that nature. You are going to need a power supply if you're going to do a base station, and you're going to need one with sufficient amps for whatever power you're trying to put out. So you have a 20 watt, 50 watt radio, you're going to need something well over 30 amps to pull that. And they range from $80 to $200 depending on what kind you get. You're also going to need good coax. You're going to need to do some research and buy good coax for your base station. Bad coax will make it where your radio signal, your radio frequency, the RF in the coax will dissipate before it gets to your antenna. So if you have bad coax, you got a 20 watt radio and you're going out, and I've had these problems before, I had to learn the hard way, you're going out 50 feet, you may only have 5 watts or 4 watts coming out of your antenna if it's all dissipating through your coax because you have insufficient coax. So you're going to want to do the research on that and get good coax, and it's going to cost some money if you're going out a long way, or you're going to have to get your radio as close to your antenna using as least amount of coax as possible, and that's going to take a lot of testing, field testing, and just trying to figure out what works for you. Okay, one of the biggest advantages to GMRS is being able to use repeaters, which can increase the range of your radio drastically depending on the terrain. Your antenna, your radio, and the repeater, just all depends. There's not one size fits all. Your radio makes a difference, your antenna makes a difference, the repeater you're trying to hit makes a difference, how powerful it is, where it's at, how high it is, and the terrain. So all that plays in, and you're going to have to play around and see what happens. Now, what a radio repeater is basically another radio station that takes your signal and spits it back out. And normally a repeater is much higher than you, so you can radio to that repeater and it spits it back out, and somebody else out there listening to you can go back through that repeater and talk to you, and they could be 40, 50, 60 miles away depending on the size of the repeater and where you're at. I've talked with people well over 50 miles, 60 miles away using a repeater. And the repeater that I'm talking through is 40 miles away from me using my base station. And I've even hit that same repeater 40 miles away using a handheld, a 5-watt handheld. Now, some repeaters even are connected to the internet, and you can actually talk through the repeater using your radio, and then it will connect to another repeater, sometimes on the other side of the country, and you can talk to people. Let's say I've talked to people in California, in Texas, from Louisiana, and that is using the local repeater here in my area, taking my transmission and sending it through the internet out to another repeater, usually multiple ones, and I can talk to people that way. Now, that only works if the internet's working, so that's the downside to that. If the internet's down, that will not work. And here's a little diagram on kind of how a repeater works. You know, you have your radio that you're sending a signal to the repeater, and then the repeater spits it out and goes to the other radio. GMRS repeaters are everywhere. They're all over the United States. You may not even have one in your area, or you could have multiple ones in your area that you can use that are often open for the public to use. Now, some are private and you need permission. Sometimes you have to pay a club a certain fee to use their repeater, you know, sometimes $10 a year or something like that, and they do require certain tones called PL tones to be able to use that repeater. But if you go to mygmrs.com, you can look for all the repeaters listed in the United States, and you may have a bunch in your area. And if you don't have one in your area, you may be able to put one up where you're at. Maybe you have a high spot there on your farm or somewhere there in your town. You can put one up. Perhaps you can get with a bunch of your buddies and get together and pitch in and buy one and put it on a tower or something there nearby and make your own repeater. That is legal, and you're able to do that. The picture of the one there is a handheld repeater that you can it's more portable. They're usually not as sufficient as a huge repeater, but it's an option out there. They usually run for around $400 or $500 for something like that, but they have some bigger ones out there that are much more sufficient. The important thing to do when you get all your radio gear is to test it. One thing I have learned is you need to test your equipment. You need to test it often. You need to learn how to use it. Do not buy them, never use them, and throw them in a box to say, I'll use this in an emergency. You'll be very disappointed. You will pull it out in an emergency, have no idea what you're doing, and you're going to look at this stuff like, oh, this junk doesn't work. Well, it's not that it doesn't work. You don't know how to use it. You need to learn how to use it. You need to test it. You need to know what antenna works best in your terrain. You need to know if your handheld can hit the repeater at your home, or perhaps there's a spot in your yard that gets better signal than another spot. Because I mean, in most cases, you're not going to be able to use a handheld in your house. You're going to have to go outside. Now, if what you're trying to hit is nearby, maybe the next house over, you may be able to do that. Or if your repeater is very nearby and it's up high, you may be able to talk on a repeater and talk to someone miles and miles away from your sofa in your house. So that it just all depends. It's things you're going to have to learn. Or perhaps there is an area in your parish or your county that have, quote, dead zones where you can't reach anyone. You're talking to someone, you drive through this area, and you lose signal just like you do with your phone. There's several spots in my area where I know I cannot talk to anybody on the radio. If I'm having a conversation on the radio, I lose all signal in that area until I get out of it. It's usually a low spot. So things like this and others can only be learned if you're testing your equipment. If you're not testing your equipment, you will have no idea that these problems even exist. Now, another thing that is useful that you can do is if you have a community of people trying to get into radio, you can have one night a month or one night a week where everybody gets on their radio in your community, and you have what they often call a net, where everybody gets on and everybody checks in and they test all their equipment and talk to people. Now, if you're getting into radio and you don't know anybody in your area that you talk to that is interested in radio, you may get on the radio and just start talking, and you may find that there's people in your area that are already interested in GMRS and have base stations or mobiles. This worked for me. I mean, I ended up talking to a fella, a couple miles away very early on that was in the GMRS setup and was working on that. And I was able to use him, and I still do often. We use each other to test our equipment. Because he's several miles away, I can test antennas and things like that, and he can test antennas with me, and I can tell him what sounds good, what doesn't, and that is very useful. I mean, very important to have. And you can do that through repeaters too, but it is important to have simplex, because in an emergency situation, unless that repeater is at a place that has a backup generator, that repeater is going to go down when the power goes out. So if you have a large simplex range of many, many miles where you're able to talk to a lot of people, you don't have to rely on a repeater. A few other options that I just want to touch on briefly is the MRS radios, multi-use radio service. It's another option you may be able to use. It's similar to GMRS, but does not require a license. You do not have to get a license. You can order one right now off of Amazon, and you can use it without a license if you're worried about the legality of it. There is some differences, though. It's only 2 watts maximum. The range is about 1 mile to 2 miles in this service. It only has 5 channels. There's no repeaters allowed, and it does allow you to put different antennas on the radios, so you have removable antennas, unlike FRS. The other option is Citizens Band, or CB radio. Now, this is one that obviously does not require a license. Only 4 watts is your maximum on AM, or 12 watts on single sideband if your radio has single sideband function. The range is 2 miles to 15 miles, sometimes farther. It just depends. There's only 40 channels if you're using just the 4-watt AM, and then of course there's an additional 80 channels technically in a way if you're using single sideband. So it just depends on how you do that. There's no repeaters allowed, so you're not going to find a CB repeater. Some of the pros are there's more people that own CBs than any other radio probably in the United States. And it's better for travel information. So if you're traveling, you want to use CB. There's a lot of people on there. A lot of truckers still use them. One added benefit is you can talk skip and talk hundreds or thousands of miles away when conditions are just right using 4 watts or 12 watts. But this skip is unpredictable. I've done it a few times, and I've only been messing around with CB here pretty recently. I spoke with one fellow in Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts, from South Louisiana on 12-watt single sideband, and the same day I spoke with another fellow in Mackinac Island, Michigan, from South Louisiana. So those are very far distances on only 12 watts using a legal CB radio, not altered or higher wattage or anything like that. So that is the added benefit. There's a lot of people on CB. The farthest contact I've made on simplex is around 13-ish miles. But depending on the height of your antenna and things like that, even the 2 to 15 miles, you can go much farther. There's some people, depending on the equipment and how they have everything, you can get 25. I've even heard of 40 miles away, but it goes down to the same thing. It just depends on terrain. Another option is ham radio, amateur radio. This is arguably the best option, but it has some downsides because of a few things. The biggest downside is not everybody that you may want to talk to will have a ham radio amateur license. You do need a license. You have to pass a test, and there's several levels to the ham radio license. You have technician, general, and then extra. But you can, this is a really good option. There is hundreds of applications for ham radio. You can even send emails through ham radio, along with many other things. You can talk to the space station as it flies over, and many other things like that. Its range is literally limited to a few miles, line of sight, to worldwide, depending on what band you're using and what your equipment's like. It just depends on what kind of equipment you have and do you know what you're doing. The biggest downside to ham radio, in my opinion, in situations like this is your grandmother or the lady down the street or some family members or whoever. If you have your ham license and they don't have their ham license, legally speaking, you cannot speak with them. But with GMRS, you can do that. It's easy for someone to get their license and know how to use it. Another thing is when it comes to ham radios, it takes special knowledge and special skill to operate a lot of their equipment correctly. Now with GMRS you need to know what you're doing too, but it gets a little bit more complicated with ham radio depending on what you're using it for and what band you're using and things of that nature. It's easy to learn, but it is a learning curve, and it makes things with the local simple communication for an emergency a little bit more complicated. One good thing with almost all the GMRS radios that I mentioned here is you can monitor, listen only, some ham bands like 2 meter, 70 centimeter, things like that using your radio. And you can even monitor some emergency services. You can look these frequencies up at radioreference.com. So that's an added benefit. So in conclusion, if you're using a FRS radio for around the $20 minimum, you can get a set of 2 Baofeng MP25 radios, and you can communicate with someone within a half a mile to 1 mile. So if you're wanting to talk within that range, 20 bucks, you're good to go. It's finished. Now, if you want GMRS radio, the bare minimum you can do is if you use GMRS radios for around $20, the same amount as an FRS, you can get a set of 2 Baofeng MP31 radios, and you can communicate within a 1 to 3 mile range with those radios right out of the box. If you add a $20 Nagoya NA771G antenna, depending on your terrain, you can now talk 3 to 6 miles handheld to handheld. But you need a license to do this if you want to stay legal. You can also use like radios like this, and you can use repeaters too and talk even farther. Maybe even depending on the repeater, 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 miles away. It just depends on the radio. If you want to upgrade along the way, you can of course upgrade to a mobile or a base station in GMRS, or perhaps choose one of the other options I mentioned earlier for your emergency communication solution, whatever it may be. And like I said, this video here is nothing, I'm no expert in radio, but these are just some of the things that I have discovered along the way. Some of the equipment that I use that works, that I had to buy a few different levels and sell stuff off to see what works and what doesn't. And for me, my current setup, I'm able to talk 40, 50 miles away to someone through a repeater, or 8 to 9, 7, 8, 9 miles away, simplex to simplex, depending on their equipment, my equipment, the terrain, and things of that nature. So anyway, with all that said and done, that is just a basic 101 on emergency communications using GMRS and FRS radio services. Hey, if you like this video, if you gained something from it, leave a comment below, like the video, share it. And if you want more videos like this, I'll be happy to put some more out and maybe get into more details. I try to make this as simple as possible. That way I can send this to friends and family that are interested in GMRS and FRS radio services, just for local emergency communications, nothing more than that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and if you're interested in supporting me, you can order a holster at swordslingerholsters.com. That's what I do for a living. I don't do radios for a living, but that will definitely help support the channel. So, thank you. Until next time.